The night she lost faith in promises began with the smell of cinnamon and pine and a silence that felt louder than any storm. Snow pressed against the windows like a held breath, and the clock on the wall ticked with a cruelty she could almost hear even without seeing it. For the blind woman standing alone at her small kitchen table, Christmas dinner was supposed to be proof that life could still surprise her gently. Instead, it arrived like a lesson she had already learned too many times, that hope, when left unattended, could bruise. Before you go any further, pause for a second. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that small acts can change entire lives, take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope. Comment your thoughts and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this exist because people still care. Her name was Eleanor, and she had learned to navigate the world by memory and sound long before she learned how to forgive it. Blindness had come gradually, a narrowing tunnel of light that eventually closed, leaving her with textures and echoes and smells as her compass. She lived alone with her dog, a calm, steady presence whose breathing had become her metronome. Christmas had always been complicated for Eleanor, but this year she had decided to try again. A neighbor had offered an invitation, spoken with warmth and reassurance, promising a full table, laughter, and a place where she would not feel like an obligation. Eleanor prepared for days, rehearsing the layout of the apartment, setting the table just so, cooking dishes by memory, trusting her hands to know what her eyes could not. Every movement was a quiet act of courage. When the message finally came that the dinner was canceled, vague and apologetic, Eleanor did not cry at first. She stood very still, listening to the radiator click and the wind push against the building, feeling the weight of the dress she had chosen hours earlier. The food cooled on the table. Her dog rested its head against her leg, sensing the shift in her breathing. Eleanor had been stood up in a way that felt worse than a simple no-show, because it had arrived wrapped in politeness, in explanations that sounded reasonable enough to excuse loneliness. She sat down slowly, running her fingers over the edge of the plate, and wondered when she had started expecting disappointment as a default setting. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with distant joy. Doors opened and closed, footsteps hurried past, laughter leaked through walls. Eleanor listened to it all, feeling as though she were standing on the wrong side of a glass window she could not see. She fed her dog and herself mechanically, the holiday losing its meaning with every bite. Later, she wrapped herself in a blanket and sat in the dark, the same dark she always lived in, but somehow heavier tonight. The clock continued its merciless ticking, marking time that felt wasted, and Eleanor thought about the version of herself who had once believed Christmas meant belonging. What Eleanor did not know was that just a few streets away, 3 children were arguing with the fierce, honest logic only siblings could share. The triplets, barely old enough to understand the full shape of disappointment, had been promised a Christmas dinner at home with their father, a man whose life revolved around keeping them safe. He had severe allergies, a daily calculation of risk that dictated what foods entered their house, which gatherings they attended, how cautious every celebration needed to be. When their father realized that the dinner plans had included dishes that could harm him, he had canceled the invitation he had extended to Eleanor, telling himself it was better to be safe than sorry. What he had not anticipated was the reaction of 3 young minds unwilling to accept that safety had to mean exclusion. The triplets had met Eleanor before, had heard her laughter in the hallway, had knelt to pet her dog and felt the calm intelligence in its movements. They remembered how Eleanor had described navigating the world with patience, how her dog was more than a companion, how it was trained to notice things she could not. As the house filled with the smell of a carefully controlled meal, the children felt a hollowness that did not match the season. They asked questions, pressing their father gently but persistently, until he was forced to explain his fear. It was then that one of them made the connection that would change everything, realizing that Eleanor's dog had been trained to detect specific substances, to alert before danger arrived. The solution had been sitting right beside Eleanor all along. The realization landed like a spark. The children did not see obstacles the way adults did, they saw possibilities. They convinced their father that caution did not have to mean isolation, that preparation could make room for compassion. It took time, careful planning, a thorough cleaning, and a recalculation of risks. But the decision was made with a humility that surprised him. He gathered his coat, ushered the children into boots and scarves, and stepped back into the cold night with a determination that felt like redemption. When the knock came at Eleanor's door, it startled her. Visitors were rare, especially on a night like this. Her dog rose instantly, alert but calm, tail brushing against furniture with practiced awareness. Eleanor approached the door slowly, heart racing with the familiar mix of hope and fear. She opened it to a rush of cold air, the sound of small voices shifting with excitement, and the unmistakable presence of people who had made a choice. The father explained everything carefully, his voice steady but remorseful, acknowledging the hurt he had caused without hiding behind excuses. He spoke of allergies and fear, of children who refused to accept a lonely ending to Christmas, and of a dog whose abilities offered a bridge he had been too anxious to see. Eleanor listened, absorbing not just the words but the tone, the weight behind them. She felt her dog sit beside her, a quiet affirmation. The decision to go was not easy. Vulnerability rarely is, but something in the moment felt different, as though the universe had paused to offer a correction. Eleanor gathered herself, allowed the children to take her hands, and stepped out into the snow, guided not by sight but by trust. The dinner that followed was not perfect, and that was precisely why it mattered. Plates were checked and rechecked, surfaces wiped with almost comical thoroughness, laughter rising from the shared awareness of how much effort it took to be together. Eleanor's dog moved through the space with calm authority, a silent guardian that allowed everyone to breathe easier. The triplets hovered close, fascinated by Eleanor's way of experiencing the world, asking questions with curiosity rather than pity. The father watched it all unfold with a quiet astonishment, realizing that his instinct to protect had almost cost him something far more precious than safety. As the evening wore on, something shifted inside Eleanor. The tight knot she had carried loosened, replaced by a warmth that had nothing to do with the food. She felt included not as a charity case, but as a necessary part of the night's story. Her blindness, her dog, even the earlier disappointment became threads in a tapestry that felt honest and earned. Christmas, she realized, was not about flawless plans or unbroken promises, but about the willingness to return, to repair, to try again when it would be easier to retreat. If this story is touching something in you right now, if you feel that familiar ache of hope mixed with gratitude, take a moment to engage with this video. Like it, share it, and let others feel this warmth too. Your interaction keeps stories like this alive. Near the end of the night, as the children grew sleepy and the snow softened outside, Eleanor stood in the living room and listened to the quiet hum of a house at peace. She thought about how easily the night could have ended differently, how close she had been to closing herself off again. Instead, she found herself surrounded by the gentle chaos of family, not her own by blood, but hers by choice. The father thanked her in a way that did not try to erase the past, only to honor the present. Eleanor understood then that forgiveness was not a grand gesture, but a series of small, brave steps toward connection. Before this story ends, leave a comment below and share what this moment meant to you, or tell us about a time kindness surprised you when you least expected it. Eleanor returned home later that night with her dog trotting faithfully at her side, the cold air sharp but no longer hostile. Her apartment felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because she had. She set the empty dishes in the sink, removed her coat, and sat quietly, letting the memories settle. Christmas had found her after all, not in the way she had planned, but in the way she needed. And in that stillness, with her dog's steady breathing anchoring her to the present, Eleanor allowed herself to believe again that even when you are stood up, life can still stand beside you, waiting for the moment you are ready to open the door.